Good morning. On behalf of OSU Extension and the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences, I would like to thank you for being on today's webinar and welcome you to Navigating CFAP Direct Support for Ohio's Farmers and Ranchers. I'm David Marison, an Agriculture Extension Educator in Coshocton County, and I have the privilege of being the co-leader of OSU Extension's Ohio Ag Manager team. This team helps provide farm management education across Ohio. During the past 2 months, our OSU Farm Office team has been providing education to help Ohio farmers impacted by the corona pandemic. As a reminder, our next Farm Office Live program will be held tomorrow morning beginning at 9 a.m. And you can see those connection details on the screen at this time at go.osu.edu/Farm Office Live. Again, we'll be recapping some of the questions that we received here this morning. Today, we are very pleased to be partnering with the Farm Service Agency in conjunction with Ohio AgNet and many of our state commodity groups to offer this program to provide details about the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or better known as CFAP. So to begin today's program, we will share the impact of coronavirus and its impact on our commodity markets here in Ohio. This will set the stage for a discussion on the mechanics of the CFAP program. Following these two discussions, we'll have plenty of time to answer your questions and answers live here on this broadcast. With that, I am pleased to turn the program over to Brown and Dianne Shoemaker, who will share the impact of COVID-19 on our farm markets. Brown is an assistant professor of professional practice for agricultural risk management in the Department of Agriculture, Environmental, and Development Economics, and Dianne Shoemaker is an associate professor and field specialist for dairy production economics for OSU Extension. So now we'll turn it over to Brown.
All right, thank you, David, and welcome everybody. Thanks for being with us today. So Dianne and I's goal and what we want to do is provide a little bit of an introduction and set the stage for Director Hubert of Ohio FSA to provide us with some information about the CFAP program and payment rates. I know that's of interest to everybody, but we do just kind of want to set the stage and answer some questions that we get asked a lot in terms of the impact to the sector and to different commodities. So David, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for me. Thank you. So on this slide here, I just want to show cash prices for both corn and soybeans in Ohio. Again, these are Ohio cash corn and soybean prices. And we've seen a drop from about $4 per bushel in corn all the way down to $3.05 as of yesterday. We've seen a corresponding drop in soybean prices, but not nearly as far. When we translate that into farm income, though, which is kind of the big thing that everybody wants to know around, we have 4 representative farm panels across the state that I use to kind of navigate this. These are made up of actual farmers. I have 2 in Hardin County and 2 in Henry County. And when we look at those, we have about a $20 per acre loss in old crop revenue. Keep in mind, we're still in the 2019 marketing year, and this program is targeted to help the 2019 commodities. And about a $53 loss per acre in 2020 contribution margin. So basically what we expect in terms of revenue to expenses from January to now. The question that comes up is, do these programs start to change our federal safety net and we become more dependent on ad hoc income supports as we move forward? And so, David, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. On the energy side and looking at ethanol and biofuels and biodiesel, we have seen a drastic reduction, and this has played into those commodity prices I mentioned on the previous slide. We've kind of got 2 corresponding events. We've got a price war with Saudi Arabia and Russia that has flooded the world market with oil. I like to remind folks that low oil prices and reduced ethanol consumption aren't mutually exclusive. Normally, when we have low oil prices, we see a spur in demand for gasoline. And then because of the mandates under the Renewable Fuel Service, we do see increases in ethanol consumption. However, with the stay-at-home orders and roughly 48% reduction in driving, that's led to a reduction in ethanol. I like to remind folks, because this is kind of misunderstood, we're still a percentage mandate for the RFS, not a volume obligation, even though those come on the front port. And so our percentage standard is 11.5% of every gallon of gasoline consumed or has some component of biofuel, whether that's ethanol or biodiesel. We've seen increased stocks and reduced production of biofuels as a result of this. My estimates right now are about a 680 million bushel reduction in corn used for ethanol. A month ago when I was doing these initial estimates, I was at 450 million bushel reduction, but I was basically coming up with the end of the stay-at-home order, or at least 90% back to normal by June 1st, and we're clearly not going to get there. So I've expanded that to 680 million. USDA's already reduced that 475 million bushels. So I at least estimate we've got another 200 million bushels to go on the corn side. David, if you wouldn't mind move to the next slide, please. Thank you. When we look at the livestock sector, they haven't been immune to COVID-19 disruptions. The big story here is the reductions and shutdown of the packing industry. We are living out a widely held economic theory that the bottlenecks in the middle tighten. We see increases in meat prices at the retail level and decreases in prices for live animals with that margin widening. Starting with cattle, I'm illustrating here a 6-day moving average of federally inspected cattle slaughter to take into account weekends and holidays. We finally got back up above 100,000 head a couple of days last week for the first time since late March. And then yesterday we processed an estimated 106,000 head of cattle. Week over week, that's up 11%, still down 14% from a year ago. You can see that strong pickup in slaughter near the end of March as packers gave strong premiums to pull some of their cattle forward, anticipating issues later on. The choice box beef cutout was down another $10 to start the week after coming down $53 last week. That's still roughly $165 higher than what we were a year ago, with April beef production being down nearly 20% from last April. So still challenges on the beef side. David, if you would go to the next slide, please, on the pork side. On the pork side, I can tell the same story at the packer level. Lately, we've seen strength in the futures contracts for hogs there at the end of April, with some softening in the pork cutout composite led by bellies. However, like all these commodities we will talk about today, there is a visible market cost associated with COVID-19, but there has also been what I would like to call institutional costs. Some of these are pretty straightforward and intuitive, but I just like to remind us all that in periods of disruption like we face now, not only is there a loss in revenue on the top line, but there is almost always an increase in the cost in the bottom line, squeezing margins even further than we like to think. In pork, I've listed a couple of these institutional costs that impact the sector. Protecting employee health is always a top priority, and we are witnessing that again. Producers are putting in place policies to provide increased sick leave, higher pay in some cases for risk exposure, and spreading out workers to avoid contact. These are all good, but come with increased cost. Managed growth of animals is another area. Even though it's hard to slow down hogs, I like to say that we've done such a good job with genetics in this country that pigs just have to look at feed and they grow. Space management was already an issue in a growing industry, but moving pigs further to find processing or minimize pen space comes with financial costs. And then finally, in some cases, depopulation, which clearly has a lot of negative to finances and the future pork supply. David, if you'd go to the next slide, please. I just want to sum up here because I think this impacts all the commodities we're going to talk about today, but I think it's especially important to the meat sector. If we look at income effects later on down the road in 2020, I think this is something that we don't understand yet and is maybe being underplayed. I'm not convinced we understand how these changes in both consumer income and associated economic activity at retail is going to affect us in the long run. I think we would all like to think and hope that we have a sharp comeback and are at roughly full capacity 6 months from now, but I don't think that's going to happen given that roughly 39 million people have lost their job in the last 10 weeks and unemployment rate is the highest since the Great Depression, with roughly 40% of our total workforce not working. Now, granted, if some of these jobs come back, right, these are temporary layoffs in some of these cases, that's one thing. But if we don't bring them back or we have a prolonged recovery, that could be bad news for the sector and especially bad news for meat demand, as we could still see higher meat prices in the back end of 2020 with lower income. That's not a good combination for any sector, but especially not for the meat sector where we see income elasticities really affect that. And with that, Dianne, I'll turn it over to you to talk about dairy.
Okay, so this was a real challenge for the dairy industry as well as all of the others that we have talked about this morning. But it was especially a kick in the teeth to dairy because we were looking at potentially the first good year since 2014. Once stay-at-home orders went in place, there was just a sudden major change in demand. Those market disruptions were quick and harsh, with the restaurant, school, and institutional demands drying up almost instantly, and then a sudden demand, unexpected demand for fluid milk, that fluid milk increase in the stores that we've actually as an industry been trying to increase over time. And there was just no way to that quickly pivot and change all of that processing for those institutional and school uses into the bottle, basically, and not enough capacity to absorb that. And what we saw then was that unfortunate dumping of milk in some areas where processors simply weren't able to handle the amount of milk coming in, and storage capacity was an issue. It was a major pinch point. And then the timing probably couldn't have been worse. We have a spring flush in the dairy industry, and we were going right into that. Now we're tipping into that downward trend of the spring flush, but we're still at a high point for the dairy industry. And here where you see what's happened to the May milk futures contracts, just a dramatic drop above $18 down to that $10 and $11 level. And when we compare that to the cost of production of milking cows in Ohio, we're looking at about $18.45 a hundredweight, average of all farms, with that high 25% at a lower cost of production. But we're looking at prices now that are well below everybody's cost of production. And that was painfully evident in the April final milk checks, where the class 3 price at $13.07 was the lowest we've seen in 10 years. Back to you, Ben.
Just to touch on specialty crops a little bit here, it's certainly not my area that I work exclusively in or a lot in, but we do want to touch on specialty crops because they've had an impact as well. It's kind of been, at least from reports that we're hearing from producers, it's kind of been a bust and a boom type of environment, as producers that supply exclusively to retail are seeing record sales, as obviously people that aren't eating at the restaurant are now buying more at grocery stores. When we look at the big 3 market disruptions in this industry, and again, I think we could apply this to a couple of different commodities, is schools having a big impact. Right now, it's estimated $120 million loss to producers, fruit and vegetable producers, as a result of schools shutting down early. Roughly a 40% loss in sales from restaurants. Keep in mind, we do pick some of those back up, even though they've been shut down through delivery and drive-through and takeout. And then finally, farmers markets and U-Pick. And we're kind of at the beginning of that season a little bit, tapering into kind of the hot season in terms of the big demand there. But farmers markets and U-Pick down 10%. A total about a $5 billion loss to everything: logistics, wholesale, retailer, shippers. As well. And again, that's thanks to the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. So we did want to talk about specialty crops. David, if you go to the next slide for me, please. To kind of tie this all together, we get asked about the impacts to the entire sector. The University of Missouri, the Food Policy and Ag Research Institute, was contracted by the USDA to kind of do some of the initial analysis to this. And this was the results of their analysis that they provided to the Chief Economist's office in DC. There's a couple of key assumptions here: 2.5% decline in real consumer expenditures in food. That might not sound like a lot, but I remind us how much we spend in food as a country annually, and that adds up pretty quick. A 15% decline in oil prices, which picks up and helps us on the energy costs, oil and fuel plus fertilizer. And then a decline in receipts for crop and livestock. And you can see the changes there. These are changes from the baseline. So again, you see declines in crop receipts and livestock receipts, but an increase in government payments above that baseline, for a total net farm income loss of about $20 billion. So David, if you go to the next slide, please. And that's kind of what fed into USDA. I think it's interesting that the University of Missouri provided that report that all of us kind of count as like the standard of how these programs came about, or, this program was financed. USDA announced a $19 billion program, $3 billion for food purchases and distribution, and $16 billion in total payments. It's made up in 2 parts, and Director Hubert's going to talk about that here in a bit, in terms of those 2 different components and why there's 2 different payment rates for a lot of these commodities. When we look at the sectors, these are the estimates of how much each sector is going to receive out of this pot. No, I can do math. So if you add those up, it doesn't add up. It adds up over $16 billion. Those numbers over there on the side are the numbers without payment limitations. And so there are payment limitations that are going to reduce this down to that $16 billion. So I just want to point that out. And then finally, we get asked a lot of questions about why is winter wheat not an eligible commodity, and eggs. I've had a lot of calls about those 2 in specific. What I've done here is I've just taken all the commodities in Ohio that we grow, minus fruits and vegetables. They're their own slide, and there's a lot of them. And if you want those, I'll be happy to supply those. But here's the percentage declines based on the rules and the methodology USDA used. You can see the drop of 58% in pigs, all the way down to soft red winter, hard red winter wheat at 3% and 4% respectively. And then I just remind us that this was kind of bad timing a little bit for the egg industry. They saw a big run up, and then the week that was picked there in April was kind of the peak of the egg industry. They've since come back down from that. But nonetheless, it did not experience a 5% price decline. And again, that was the price change between January 13th and 17th, the week of January 13th and 17th, and the week of April 6th and 9th. And so with that, David, I will turn it back over to you. And thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks, Ben and Diane. Just a reminder that for some of the information that we have, the go.osu.edu Farm Office Live, if you go to our Farm Office website, the paper that Ben and our team has written on the CFAP program can be accessed there, as well as all the other things that we're working on with the CARES Act and WIP and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So we invite you to join us on tomorrow morning for that, as well as just check out our resources at Farm Office Live. With that, we're going to make a transition, and it is my great honor to introduce to you Mr. Leonard Hubert, who's the State Executive Director for the Ohio Farm Service Agency. Now, Mr. Hubert has a long history of being dedicated to outreach and education, and he was appointed by President Trump to lead our Ohio USDA Farm Service Agency on November 2017. He is a native of Atmore, Alabama, earned a bachelor's degree in agribusiness and a master's degree in agribusiness and education from Alabama A&M University. Now, I'm excited to know that he began his career, as many of us in Extension did, as an agriculture education teacher in Pennsylvania. And then he worked in a variety of positions for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, including being the chief of the Agriculture Marketing Service Division. He moved to Ohio to serve as the chief of the Division of Weights and Measures at the Ohio Department of Agriculture, and now we are blessed to have Leonard as the state leader for our Farm Service Agency. I know I can, on behalf of Extension, we really, really appreciate the working relationship that we have with all of our county farm service agencies across Ohio. We are so impressed with the work that our county offices are doing, juggling the multitude of programs that have been brought forth from our federal government. And we have enjoyed teaming up with the Farm Bill education especially, and collaborating in this effort to assist farmers to learn about the CFAP program. So Leonard, we are very, very pleased to have you as part of this program today. And we're going to turn the mic over to you to share the technical details about the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. Thank you, Leonard.
Thank you very much, David. Glad to be with everyone today. Special thanks to Ohio AdNet for being our host today, and certainly kudos to all of our great friends from the Ohio State University Extension Program. I was kidding with Ben the other day, and I said, Ben, I don't know whether you realize this or not, but on the past 18 months. Ohio FSA, we've stood up 6 ad hoc programs, including the new farm bill. And I was speaking with Mark Van Hughes, our chief for our price support section yesterday, and Mark said to me that he's been with this agency for over 30 years, and he have not done a total of 6 ad hoc programs in his entire career. So kudos to the folks who really get the work done on a day-to-day basis. And I always kid with our folks, our staff in the state office, and say it's certainly not us who sit in the state office. It's certainly the local people in our FFSA office, county offices, who get the work done on a day-to-day basis. So often they were required and asked to do more with less, and we just keep asking them to do more and more, and they always step up to the plate and meet the call. And so we're excited to talk today a little bit about the coronavirus food assistance program, and of course, in these acronyms, if you don't do that in the FSA or USDA, you know, you really have to get started over and find another career. So we'll just talk about CFAP for the remainder the program today. Now, back early in March this year, Congress signed and the president signed the CARES Act, and within that CARES Act, as most of you know, we got this $16 billion to be made to direct payments to producers to provide relief to American farmers and ranchers impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. And Ben mentioned earlier, and we certainly want to indicate as well, that in addition to the direct support payments to farmers and ranchers, USDA is supporting with regional and local food distributions whose workforces have been significantly impacted by the closure of many restaurants, hotels, and other food service entities, and where we are purchasing an additional $3 billion in fresh produce, dairy, and meat. So if you look, and we're talking about the statutory authority that goes with this, as we just indicated, from the Coronavirus Act relief, the CARES Act, in which we're authorizing. And we're going to talk a little bit today about those two buckets, where we're getting our funding from, and from both the CARES Act and the other ones from the Commodity Credit Charter Act as well. So, David, you go to the next slide, please. Sign up, as most of you are aware, got started yesterday. It was a big day across the country, and certainly a big day here in Ohio as well. And just want to remind all of our producers that sign up started yesterday, but we have until August 28th, 2020. So you don't have to, everybody don't have to rush in and call our offices today. We got some time to get this done. Ben mentioned earlier, our ag economists went through all of the numbers, and we're pretty certain that we have the dollars to administer this program, and so we got a little time to get there. Next slide, please. Who is eligible? And as we've stated this over and over again, we want to emphasize this, that producers with ownership risk of identified commodities that suffered a 5% or greater national price loss as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, or has substantial market costs and inventories, and who produces or own one of the following commodities: milk, non-specialty crop, wool, livestock, and specialty crops. Next slide, please. So any production, sales, or inventory that is not subject to an agreed upon price in the future throughout, we're talking about forward contracts here, agreement, similar binding documents, applies to all eligible commodities. Next slide, please. So if you're out there and you're saying, okay, what forms do we need to be concerned about, Leonard? Well, the following forms are all applicable forms to CFAP. We have what is the basic application, the AD 3114, the CC 902, that's the farm operating plan for payment eligibility, and the CC 901 member information for legal entities. That's only if applicable. Next slide, please. The following forms are additional forms as well. The CC 941, which is the acreage, the average gross income, which we all refer to as a GI certification. The CC 942, which is the certification of an income farmer as well, and that's optional. And then we have the AD 1026 certification forms as well. Next slide, please. So, talk a little bit about the application process, and because this is a little different from most of our programs. Typically, producers share their certification with us, and then we kind of take the program and move through it, and then there's a closing date. And but we want to note that that once Producer signs the application. You have 60 days from the date you sign the application to ensure that you have all of the additional information, those forms that we mentioned earlier, back to the office. Because if you don't do that, then failure to timely provide all the eligible forms will result in a no payment or could reduce payment. So it's critical. We want to point that out, that once you've signed the application, the CFAP application, you got an additional 60 days to get the remainder of all that information to our office. Next slide, please. Payments will be based on specific payment rate by commodities, and we'll talk a little more specific about those payments later. But 80% of the calculation of the payment will be made up front, and then we'll make those payments first. Next slide, please. Talk about the payment limitations and a little bit about the payment eligibility. To be eligible for the CFAP payment, a producer must have had a share in the eligible commodity on January 15, 2020, and or April 16th through May 14th. In addition to the producer must be a citizen or national of the United States, resident alien, meaning that you possess a resident alien card, I-551, partnership or citizens of nationals of the United States, corporations, limited liability companies, or any other organization structure organized under state law. Indian tribes or tribal organizations, as well as foreign persons or foreign entities who meet foreign and persons rules according to 5PL. Next slide, please. Ineligible producers, federal, state, and local governments, including public schools, persons or legal entities who did not have a reported ownership interest in any of the eligible commodities on a specified date, as we talked about, persons or legal entities suspended or disbarred or otherwise excluded from participation in federal programs, and persons, legal entities that do not meet payment liability limitation, payment eligibility as AGI, and those other qualifications that I spoke of just a moment ago as relate specifically to CFAP. The initial CFAP payment, as I mentioned, will be factored at 80% of the calculation payment and will be applied after applying payment limitation. The maximum amount a person or legal entity may receive is $200,000 for corporations, LLCs, as well as LPs qualified for the additional increase in limitation may receive a maximum of $400,000 or $600,000 respectively. Subsequent payments will be issued at a later date as directed and determined by the Secretary. Next slide, please. CFAP payments to persons of legal entities will be limited according to the rules of attribution, and then CFAP payments made directly or indirectly to a person of legal entity will be combined and limited to the person of legal entity. Next slide, please. And from the conservation compliance for CFAP, let me just mention this. Although this is a requirement, we're not going to expect and are anticipating that this will be done when you walk in the door. So we have time to get this done as well. So this will apply for the 2020 crop. We're talking about the certification AD 1026, and this form is used to ensure compliance with highly enrollable land conservation as well as wetland conservation. And for CFAP additional certification in Part A, the producer agreement, and you will see that identified on the AD 3140 forms in those particular sections of 7A, 7B, and Section A. Next slide, please. Dairy production. Thanks, Diane, for talking a great deal about our dairy industry. And most of you know that our dairy industry has been under some, as well as agriculture industry in general, has been in some extreme, serious economic situations. And again, we're very pleased that the dairy industry is eligible to participate in this program as well. And for dairy operations whose milk for the following months are eligible for CFAP, January, February, and as well as March of 2020. And we note that dairy operations that dissolved during the months of January, February, March of 2020 are also eligible for pounds of milk production during any months they produce milk. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit more about the CFAP eligible milk production is milk produced for the months, again, of January, February, March of 2020. Any dump milk during those months of January, February, March as well. Milk production subject to price risk of the months of January, February, and March. And then dairy production covered under the dairy market margin coverage program, as we all refer to the DMC, as well as the Dairy Revenue Production Protection Program, and any other dairy revenue insurance maintenance maintains eligibility for CFAP as well. Next slide, please. Producers will use the following information to self-certify for January, February, March. Milk marketing statements for the months of January, February, March. Records of dump milk not listed on the marketing statements for the months of January, February, March. And also milk production not subject to milk risk. An example of that would be forward contracts identify milk production not eligible for the CFAP dairy. Here we also want to remind that documents that are not required to prove were not required at the time of sign up in order to get certified in this program. So if what you're going to notice consistently throughout our rules and our process is this is a self-certification program. We want producers to come in the door. We want producers to be a streamlined process to get signed up for the program, and then we will work through getting all of this additional forms that has to be done. So a little difference in this program, but we want to make it fluid. We want to make it be streamless and seamless as possible. Next slide, please. Joint venture dairy operations. Members of dairy operation operating a joint venture without a tax identification number will simply apply for CFAP, and producers will apply using their applicable pounds of monthly milk production per producer depending on their share of the dairy operation. Next slide, please. The CFAP dairy payments. Diane talked a little bit about that, but we'll talk a little more specifics about the payments for eligible milk production. Will be the sums result basically in utilizing those two calculations from those two different pots of funding that we talked about earlier. First one being part one being the CARES Act, and then the second one being that of the CCC, the Commodity Credit Corporation. And so for the CARES Act, we're talking about the calculation based of the 0.071, and then for 0.147 for the CCC. Next slide, please. And so let's talk about a little bit about what are the eligible commodities. I know Ben went through a little bit of that. So we won't spend a great deal of time on it, but again, we will repeat these as well. Malt and barley, canola, corn, upland cotton, millet, oats, sorghum, soybeans, sunflowers, durum wheat, hard red spring wheat, as well as wood. And note that crops intended for grazing are ineligible for CFAP. So we want to make that very clear as well. Next slide. How were eligible crops, commodities determined? Next slide, please. Ben talked about this as well, and we want to overemphasize and can emphasize the importance of this so that everyone be on the same page, realizing that we have to have a 5% decline in future prices between the weeks of January 13th through 17th of 2020 and April 6th through 9th of 2020. Next slide, please. And to determine the commodities, USDA will consider additional commodities to be eligible for CFAP by collecting information on potential eligible commodities. And want to really emphasize this. So producers of commodities not included on CFAP list who believe that they suffered a 5% or greater price loss decline between the time frames in which we talked about for eligibility, who face additional market costs as well due to COVID-19, may submit comments to provide information about additional commodities, and that's real key. Next slide, please. And so in order to do that, a couple ways that producers can do that. Producers make and have through these methods until June 22nd to share that information with us. They can do it by what we call the federal rulemaking portal, the docket. That can be submitted through that way, or you can mail directly to FSA with that address that was shown there as well. So those are two ways that for those commodity, any commodity group that felt that they feel that they are eligible, meeting the criteria of the 5% reduction that during those time frames in which we share with you, have an opportunity to share with us using those two formats to let us know, and then we will take those on advisement. The non-specialty crops for wool and payments. Next slide, please. The payment rates for marlin barley and canola and corn, we have all those there for you. So I won't talk a great deal in specifics about that, because later on we're going to actually share a neat little tool with you that actually shows you how to use the calculator, and that's going to be we think is a very smart tool, and actually it's probably going to do what that 2-minute tool is going to do, what Ben and Diane and I've done for the last 45 minutes. It's going to make it very simple for you. And so you're probably going to say at the end of that, why don't you guys just share the tool with us? And then Ben and Diane and myself probably could have taken the morning to do some other work as well. But next slide, please. Additional continued payment rates. We see the rates there for sorghum, soybeans, and sunflower, and wheat, as well as wool. And next slide, please. The payment formula, as we mentioned early, with respect to the CARES Act, we're using the 50% of the above number multiplied by the CARES Act rate. Next slide, please. And we talked additional about the Commodity Credit Cooperative, Commodity CCC CHIRBA Act payments as well, where the formula rate, we're going to use the same process but multiplied by their CC rate. And these numbers, so when we show you the tool, it actually be more simple, and you'll be able to identify what was a reference to. Next slide, please. And so the total payment, the sum of the both buckets of the CARES Act as well as the CCC Charter Act payment, and this is where you get your total payment when we take from both of those buckets. Next slide, please. Talk about our livestock industry, um, um, eligible producers. It's a producer of a legal entity who shares in the risk of producing a crop or livestock and who is eligible to share in the crop or livestock available for marketing or would have shared and had a crop or livestock been produced and marketed. Next slide, please. Continue to talk about the eligible producer. We know we have some contract growers out there, and so any contract grower who does not own the livestock will be considered a producer if the contract allows for the grower to have share risk in the livestock. Livestock owners and contract growers who are not at risk and have a share of the livestock available for marketing or would have a share had the livestock been marketed or eligible livestock producers. Next slide, please. Livestock that realized a 5% or greater national market price decline between the average of the week of January 13th through the 17th of 2020 relative to the average of the week of April 6th through the 10th have been determined eligible for CFAP. And also the national payments have been determined based on those price declines. Next slide, please. Here we talk a little bit about the eligible livestock. We just notice we have the livestock categories broken out into 3 category areas. We talk about cattle, and when we're talking cattle, we're talking feeder cattle or less than 600 pounds. Feeder cattle, 600 pounds or more. Cattle, we're talking about slaughter cattle, feed cattle, fed cattle, slaughter cattle, and mature cattle, and other cattle. And we'll talk a little bit more in our next slide about those as well. And here we are also talking about hogs and pigs. Pigs less than 120 pounds and hogs 120 pounds or more. Lambs and yearlings are all sheep less than 2 years old. Next slide, please. Feeder cattle, we're talking less than 600 pounds, meaning cattle weighing less than 600 pounds. Feeder cattle, 600 pounds or more, means feeder cattle weighing more than 600 pounds, but less than slaughtered cattle, fed cattle as defined. And slaughtered cattle and fed cattle means cattle with an average weight in excess of 1,400 pounds, which yield average carcass weight in excess of 800 pounds, are intended for slaughter. Next slide, please. A little bit more in those definitions. Slaughter cattle, we're talking a mature cattle, means culled cattle raised or maintained for breeding purposes, as well as but were removed from inventory and are intended for slaughter. Additional cattle raised or maintained for breeding purposes mean animals commercially raised or maintained for use as either a sire or dam for the production of livestock and offsprings or lactation. And as well, additional than the category of all other cattle, we're talking about means commercial raised or maintained bovine animals are not meaning the definition of other categories that we specifically talked about earlier in cattle rules, excluding bison and other animals used for dairy production are intended for dairy production. Next slide, please. Definitions, we're talking continually about pigs and hogs, lambs and yearlings. Here we talked about pigs, meaning any swine weighing less than 120 pounds. Hogs, again, meaning any swine 120 pounds or more. And for lambs and yearlings, we're talking about any sheep less than 2 years old. Next slide, please. Livestock on January 15th and sold between January 15th and April 15th of 2020. Offspring born from that January 15th inventory, as well as livestock inventory on between April 16th and May 14th to 2020. And then livestock that are no longer used for dairy production and have entered the beef cattle market. Note also All sales and inventory for livestock must be subject to price risk as of January 15, 2020. Next slide, please. Ineligible livestock. Ineligible livestock reference to livestock used for dairy production are intended for dairy production. Livestock purchased after January 15, 2020 and sold on or before April 15, 2020. And livestock subject to and agreed upon a price in the future through a forward contract agreement or similar binding document as of January 2020. Next slide, please. Dairy cattle eligible for CFAP. We're talking dairy cattle again that are no longer used for dairy production and have entered the beef cattle market are eligible for CFAP. And for example, we're talking about dairy club cows, slaughter cattle, mature cattle. We're talking dairy calves, talking feeder calves, 600 pounds. And dairy cattle used for dairy production are intended for dairy production, not eligible for CFAP livestock. However, milk production from this livestock is eligible for CFAP dairy. The information required for producers to participate in CFAP. Again, we're talking about a self-certification by the producer or an authorized representative. Next slide, please. The following sales and inventory information is required for livestock production as applicable. As I've indicated earlier, we want to reemphasize this. You don't have to walk in the door when you make the application or actually doing it over the phone, since we're still operating with our offices by appointments virtually. And here I also want to take a note and emphasize the importance, and we're certainly thank producers for what they're doing. But as we continue to move in these virtual and operative operations, and which we're going to be doing more of, I want to stress to producers, there are two things that we would love for you to continue to do with us, and that is share your cell phone numbers with us. We have the ability to forward text information to you and quickly as possible. We're not going to text you at night to tell you about the football game between Alabama and OSU, or any of that kind of information. I'm sure you would like to hear that, but we want to be able to provide you with our services. And so if we have your current email address information, your updated cell phone, as well as your home phone number, contact information, please continue to share that with our offices so that we can certainly get that information out to you. Next slide, please. Here we talk a little bit about the payment characterization that we talked about earlier. Again, we're talking about those two funding buckets. One is the CARES Act funding, and the other one is the CC fund payment. So we see the difference there, not only in the rate payment, but just a little bit difference in the date, with the date being for the CARE funding from January 15th to April 15th, and then on the CC funding side, it's the 16th through May. Actually, when we see the two, we just want you to really understand the process and understanding where the funding is coming from. This is not going to be, you're not going to have to figure this out. We've gotten all that figured out for you. We just want you to fully understand why the payments are the way they are and what the rates are and where the payments is actually coming from. Next slide, please. Here we look at some of the livestock payment rate. We look at cattle there. And we also look at hogs and pigs, and we look at lambs. We can see we go down through there, and feeder cattle, we're looking at per head, and we can see their payment rate there for 102 for coming from the CARES Act, and then 33 coming from the CCC, and we can just go right down the list, and you can see those payments as well. Next slide, please. Value loss crops. Next slide, please. The eligible value loss crop. At this time, we have not determined any value loss crops, and so we are not specifically talking about those at this time. We do anticipate the possibility that aquaculture and floriculture will be added. So we will hear more about those once those, if and when those programs are added as well. Next, we'll talk a little bit about specialty crops, and Ben talked a little bit about those as well. We want to emphasize that FSA has accepted, will accept the producer certification for each category without the county committee's action required. Again, we want to have a very streamlined process. We want to get you in the office, meaning get you in the office virtual, get your application approved, and we want to get the payment out. The Ag Marketing Service has already will provide contact for any questions. AMS as well will complete the spot checks for payments as issued. Again, I want to emphasize this, as we do in most of all our spot check programs. As you know, it is a self-certification, so the information that you share with us, we trust and believe it to be accurate. And then if you spot check and the information is any difference from the information that you share with us, then the onus and the responsibility then relies with the producer, because it is a self-certification program. The next slide, please. How to apply. A very simple process. Producer can apply through with all our programs, can apply through any county FSA office. The only thing that we do emphasize that for our payments, the payments will come from the administrative offices, and those are the offices that you typically have on record and on file with FSA. But you can, go to any FSA office and file. We can always, and we encourage you to go to our FSA USDA Gov Ohio website, and all our information is there. And of course, as always, feel free to contact your local FSA office. I do ask, be patient when you call our office. Certainly, you can imagine the volume of the calls. We are making every effort to ensure that we get every call answered. We will get your call answered if your call is not answered within the first second. Just be a little patient and wait another second. But we will get your call answered. And also, we do have a special website of Farmers Gov CFAP as well, in which you can download the electronic and put right on your smart devices and communicate with us as well. Next slide, please. We done a little something that's new to kind of help alleviate. At least we thought we were going to alleviate some of the cause. We set up a service center. We thought that we were going to, as a national service center, where you can call and find out like general information about, typically your name and address, personal information, what you need to become eligible to participate in the CFAP program. When we set up the call center, the national call center, we set it up intentionally for what we consider to be new producers, individuals who have not been working with the FSA offices. And you can imagine yesterday we found out it was a little different. We had more calls in the call center yesterday from our traditional producers than we got from new producers, but that's okay. It means that everybody is excited to find out more information about this program. But there is a CFAP call center number out there. We certainly want and encourage individuals, especially those producers who are not accustomed to dealing with us on a day-to-day basis in our local FSA centers, to call that, can take use of that, make use of that call center 800 number and call into the call center. Next slide, please. Okay. Here I've gone over initially all of these information, but this is basically information that I went over prior with what we call our typical producers have to have. And this is just information that we're sharing with individuals who have not been working with FSA, and this will be their first time. And this is kind of the information that we're sharing with them when they call the call center. So next slide, please. Here, I really want to share, this is another some good information that I want to share with all of you today, and certainly want to again give kudos to all our ag commodity groups. I want to say this over and over again. We really appreciate all of the cooperation we get from all our commodity ag groups. You're always engaging. You're always willing to help us market it and publicize and share information. And so here's another good piece of information that we want to share with you today. We talked earlier about the CFAP program with the authorization of Congress, and then the president signing the CFAP program. Where here's an initiative that was done by the department itself. We're trying to figure out, is there something else that we could do in order to be helpful to our producers in this stressful economic time. And so what we've done is FSA has broadened the use of the disaster set-aside, what we call a DSA loan provision. Typically, when we've used this in the wake of national disasters, but we're allowing producers who have FSA loans with us who are affected by COVID to actually have their payments set aside. So if you have an FSA loan with us, you believe that you've been affected by COVID, then we're asking and encourage you to call our local service centers, speak with our farm loan staff, and they'll be more willing and happy to share with you what you need to do to get your loan payment set aside. Next slide, please. And I believe, Ben, we are now at the questions, and we're going to, this may be a little bit of tag teaming between myself, Ben, and Matt, and we got all kind of folks around here, but we can get your questions answered. We would do what we always do, and that is, if we don't know the answer, we will seek and find out an answer for you. Okay? So I know.
Leonard.
Yes.
Well, just want to say thank you, number one, because you just took like 2 hours information and did a really nice job presenting that in 30 minutes. And I'm sure we have some questions because some questions have come in online, as well as Colt has been taking some of those. Remember, you can email those questions to Colt at ohioagnet.com. Again, if you can type them in your Facebook chat there, but you also can email them to Colt with a K, K-O-L-T, at ohioagnet.com. But before we take those questions, we'll let you catch your breath there. We do want to say thank you. This is a team effort, and that's the beauty of agriculture here in Ohio, the fact that we are a family, and a family together meets the situation like we're in with the coronavirus head on together. And this program today would not be possible if it wasn't for, number one, Colt just doing amazing work behind the scenes for Ohio AgNet, Ohio Country Journal. And on the screen, we would just like to say thank you to the Ohio Cattlemen's Association, the Ohio Corn and Wheat Growers Association, the Ohio Dairy Producers Association, the Ohio Produce Growers and Marketers Association, Ohio Farm Bureau, Ohio Pork Council, Ohio Sheep Improvement Association, and the Ohio Soybean Council, as well as the mothership for us here at OSU Extension, and that is the College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences. So just a big thank you to all these organizations. We just been so impressed at OSU Extension of the collaboration that is happening between our governmental agencies like the Farm Service Agency, OSU Extension at the college level, as well as all of our industry partners. So we want to say thank you to all of our partners for coming aboard on that. So with that, Leonard, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to roll it into some question and answer period. And Leonard, also, we can also take a sneak peek here. Just you mentioned something, and Ben has put it into the chat box. And if I can try to do that, I'll get it up here in a second. But you want to say something first about the calculator. Ben has put it in the chat. It is an amazing calculator. Kudos to FSA for that. How can people access that?
You can access it by a couple ways. I mentioned our FSA, USDA.gov website, and you can actually get it from there. And the farmers.gov website, which is two basically websites that most producers are accustomed to using, and so they both can be found there as well.
Okay, and I see we have some questions coming through the chat box. So we'll just open this up because I know we got we have a few minutes here, not a few hours, but we just have some questions. First question that was put in as far as cattle raised for breeding. So talking to those beef cattle, specifically, you mentioned dairy cattle are not eligible, the cows that we have, because they're eligible for the milk side of the equation. What about those breeding beef cows out there? Are they eligible for that on-hand $33 calculation from the CCC?
Yeah, they are eligible, as I mentioned in the one slide. They are eligible. It's just a calculation formula that used for the payment.
Okay, and then I'm trying to, Ben and Diane, you can help me through scrolling through, and Colt even. But for a question that came in, for farmers that sold all their 2019 production at harvest, so we're looking at a commodity such as corn, and then they sold it all, the production at harvest. They bought it all back on the Commodities Futures Board of Trade. Does that count as unpriced grain inventory, since a producer would still have price risk?
Okay, repeat the last portion of the question.
Okay, so they sold all their production, but they bought it back on the Commodity Futures Board of Trade. So does that count as unpriced grain inventory, since a producer still has price risk?
Okay, the policy related to the question is still being working out at the national level. Thanks for the question. Excellent question. And the stance on this issue is still forthcoming. We have and this is great. And especially, I can't always give enough kudos to the commodity organization, but this question was posed early, and we've already, as we say in the state office, We already ran it up the flagpole, and so it's in the national office on the review for consideration. Yes.
Okay, great. We also saw a question for Sue, and Sue, thank you for that question on Facebook. 50-50 crop share. Do both entities need to complete the AD 3114 form?
Yes.
That's an easy answer, Leonard. Nice and succinct. I like that.
I was hoping somebody would give me some softballs today.
Well, I think we can do that. I'm trying to read through a few more of these. So the next question, for farmers that transferred grain ownership to their local elevator. So let's think through a delayed pricing, a deferred pricing. Who submits for those payments?
Well, the policy on delayed and deferred pricing is still being worked on as well at the national level, and stance on this issue is forthcoming as well. That's another one. I think I know where that question came from. I got some friends out there. I don't know in the grain industry that probably works for corn, soybeans of one of those groups. I posed that question back early, so that's another one of those ones that we're chasing down. Okay,
great. And then the next question: how about this on-farm corn silage that was produced in 2019? Is that part of the 2019 grain production calculation or not?
Yeah, well, the producer who needs to report both the corn silage and the corn for grain, the silage will be converted from tonnage to bushel, and the silage line item will then be combined with the other corn production, and then a total payment for the corn will be issued, and payments will be issued for the per commodity and will be included on the intended uses.
Okay. And Leonard, there's some comments in the chat there that I'm sure you'll review about. They're more of a statement than some questions, but I'm sure you can review those. I want to acknowledge that, though, that about cattle that was not sold and they were held till now instead of being marketed. Just a comment about the higher payment on the front side instead of the back side where the 33. But I'm sure you can take a look at that. Another question about what if a producer has just a basis contract on grain, nothing else? Do those bushels count?
Well, in a basis contract, the base is the difference between the local cash price of a commodity and the price of a specific future contract or the same commodity at a given point in time. By establishing a base contract, the producer has not set a price. An example for a base that was locked in on before October 4th, 2019, and it was subject to a price risk as of January 15, 2020. The base contract then would count as the 2019 production, not sold as of January 15, 2020.
Okay. Great. And I think you've answered the next two questions kind of come in, and I think you addressed those, but just so we can repeat it. So, because the question's been asked, does foundation herd, so we're talking breeding stock inventories, does that get included in the other cattle category? Yeah,
it does for payment, yes.
Okay. And then what about dairy feeder steers?
Yeah, that was. Can you pull up slide number 5? No, it's on any dairy cattle that are taken out of dairy production and are being used for beef purposes will be considered beef cattle. So dairy feeder steers will be categorized according to the beef cattle categories that we talked about earlier, depending on their weights.
Okay, great, Leonard. Sorry about that. I'm locked out of the shared screen section here, right?
I got so much help around here.
You got good helpers. I
got great help. No, I got good help. I got great help. They keep me straight.
That's amazing. So, Diane, Ben, other questions that you've come through to you, or Colt, anything that's come through to you that I've missed asked, Leonard?
Ben says, Ben's shaking his head. Ben, should I tell the story what happened today? No.
I think technology is wonderful as long as
I
it
know
works, right, Leonard?
but we'll just leave it at that. We'll celebrate another time.
Well, this just shows the rural connectivity issues that we have. We say rural connectivity is out across Ohio, but even in the city of Columbus, we have some connectivity issues. We're just so blessed that you were able to make it work. And just as a closing thought, Leonard, just I know you already mentioned this, but I think it would be we just need to reinforce just the quality of work that your staff is doing out across Ohio. Seriously, and we're very sincere when we say we appreciate the work that is going on day to day at the county level. I know you are too, but I didn't know if you wanted to make a comment about that as well.
Definitely. One of the things that I do, and certainly the staff and FSA knows this, every conversation, every meeting that we do on a day-to-day basis. I start my meetings off by thanking our staff. I conclude our meetings by thanking our staff. Every opportunity that I get, like today, an opportunity to speak about the great work of this agency, I have to give thanks to our staff. As I indicated early, I don't think a whole lot of people don't realize and don't understand the magnitude of what has taken place over the last 18 months. As I indicated, we've stood up 6 ad hoc programs. And when I'm talking about ad hoc programs, I'm talking about programs that are not non-traditional programs. We stood up a new farm bill. And of course, all of these ag organizations, commodity groups that we talked about early is to be given credit to because everybody understands what we're dealing with. And we are dealing with it from a family perspective, and we're trying to get the work done. But we as FSA, when we first began the coronavirus pandemic, they said, okay, for all agencies that telework, go. And begin the process of telework. And most people don't realize this unless within the USDA. Well, FSA, from its history, and we love its history and its mission, it's an agency where we meet to produce at the county. That's what we do, and we do it extremely well. And our staff love to do that, and we love doing it. But this pandemic required us to do something that we have not done in the history of this agency, and that is to telework. And we're teleworking, and we got staff coming in the offices. These offices, our offices that I've indicated over and over again. We have not closed the office, and our office is open. They just simply open by virtue of communicating by phones, and I must admit, it gets a little hectic at times. And I'm sure the staff probably get a little tired of me pushing. And sometimes I do yell and scream a little bit, but I yell and scream nicely. But our staff does a great job, and we can't do it without the support of all the organizations, and we certainly can't do it without the men and women who are in our county offices, and that includes members of our county committees, because that's a unique factor that we have within FSA. We have state and local committees, our state committee as well as our local county committees involved with our operations of how we make decisions and how we get the job done. And so kudos to all of our FSA family. We also have some folks out there who temporarily works for our agency. We have lost adjusters. who help us with our work. And so it is an FSA family, and we certainly appreciate the efforts on everybody's part in order for us to do what we do, and we do it best, and that is to provide a service on a time and efficient manner to those producers whom we work for. We work for you and enjoy what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis. And I will pledge to you that we will continue to do that. Just give us a little patience with us. But as I said, we kicked off CFAP yesterday. We have until August the 20th to get this done. And so everybody don't have to call the office today. We got a little bit of breathing time, a little breathing room. And so hopefully by that time we've got a chance to watch some Buckeye football as well as some Southeastern Conference football as well. And so I will say end again by thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. And I will end my comments by saying go Bucks.
Well, we really, really appreciate, Leonard, you joining us. And again, just as a reminder, you can receive more information about the federal farm program CFAP. Just go to farmers.gov/CFAP, farmers.gov/CFAP. And as always with OSU Extension, we're here to help you with your farm management questions. Just check us out at farmoffice.osu.edu. And lastly, I'd like to turn it back to Colt. And Colt, we want to say thank you for just sponsoring this program. Ohio AgNet, Ohio's Country Journal, thank you for what you do for agriculture. And I'm going to toss it back your way. Thanks, Colt.
Thank you, David, and thank you to our expert panel and our team here putting together this webinar, and especially my thanks to Ben Brown for making all of this work. Like David said, my name is Colt Buckenroth, and on behalf of our entire team at Ohio AgNet, thank you for joining us.